Mr. Commerce, do you believe that having American corporations use foreign subsidiaries to invest in the country of Iran is assisting in the sponsorship of terrorism?
Yes, I do, Mr. Chairman. I think that it's somewhat ironic and difficult to understand why we place a burden on American companies with respect to sanctions and then go ahead and allow foreign subsidiaries to continue to compete with companies that don't create these foreign subsidiaries. If our intent is to cut off our own companies from dealing with Iran and other terrorism-supporting states, it seems quite logical that we would want that to extend as far as possible to anyone that we could influence, including using our corporate influence and our overall policies to dissuade others, including foreign subsidiaries, from undercutting the very objectives that our sanctions were placed in for.
Interestingly, if the foreign subsidiary is not controlled by the domestic corporation, how does the foreign subsidiary, when domestic policy and domestic politics in this country say, wait a second, you're doing business with terrorists, for God's sake. You're financing terrorism. How does a foreign subsidiary all of a sudden make a decision on behalf of the domestic company, if it is in fact independent? Mr. Thompson, could you answer that?
Difficult to answer. I mean, as I said,
what do you think?
It's clear that those subsidiaries, whether they are independent or not, and in all too often, in all too many cases, they aren't really independent, should not be doing business in those countries. It is as simple as that. Looking at what the parent can and can't do, it is just a backdoor attempt to do business in these countries. And I believe that legislation should close it off, period.
Ms. Williams, you're here. There are other companies that could be sitting in that seat who have done business in Iran through a loophole that, in fact, has existed. You're quite correct that you have not violated the law with respect to intending to do business through a foreign subsidiary. I'm not so sure that Halliburton has been on the right side of the line with respect to the way that foreign subsidiary was established. For example, didn't HPSL in Dubai use the same telephone number as Halliburton's Dubai office?
Senator, I would have to reiterate that was the telephone number listed in the telephone book is actually incorrect, and we have checked into that. That was a registration office that was there because at one point we were changing the names from Otis International Limited to Otis International Limited to HPSL. The HPSL office, where all of its operations and its employees were a completely separate location, and we would be happy to provide more detailed information on that to you or your staff.
Is it the case that 100% of the profits of your Cayman Islands subsidiary came from Dubai, from the foreign subsidiary in Dubai?
Yes, because the Cayman Islands is the registration for HPSL, and their operations office is in Dubai.
And that profit came exclusively from activities in Iran?
The profit for that subsidiary came exclusively from Iran operations, yes.
Let me just say this. Well, first of all, Ms. Williams, I appreciate your coming to testify, but I do think that we're holding this hearing because I think there's something dreadfully wrong. There's just something fundamentally wrong, and when I read what Mr. Thompson has been engaged in for some long while now, it occurred to me that we ought not have to ask Mr. Thompson, who manages $100 billion of pension assets in New York City, to carry the burden of changing something that is wrong with respect to U.S. law. If we're going to have sanctions against a prohibited country, then we ought not have exceptions to it, and we ought not have someone going around the sanctions through a loophole that says we still want to do business with a terrorist state. No company should be doing that is chartered in this country, and we need to pass legislation post-haste to address it. And so I appreciate my...
Mr. Thompson, given your work and research, do you think that companies will stop doing business with terrorist nations on their own, or is legislation needed?
Unfortunately, it's become clear over a period of years that while things may be legal, it doesn't mean that they are ethical. And I believe that unless you close the loophole, companies will continue to attempt to do business in backdoor fashions.
Thanks very much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Senator Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you all for being here. I appreciate your willingness and your candor with us. Willingness to be here and your candor. Ms. Williams, I look at this. I'm not a member of this committee. I'm new to the Senate. I was in the House for 14 years, and I'm just sort of amazed by how all this has unfolded in the last 5 years or so. Your company is one that's had billions of dollars in government contracts. Your company has made settlements with the government, I believe, because of overcharges on services to our troops, often with non-delivery to the troops, often underperformance on those contracts. Your company has had millions of dollars in contracts with terrorist states, building up their economy. The Vice President of the United States, former executive of your company, draws a pension 3 times what the average American, middle-class American, earns in a year. Now you pretty much say, and the Republican Congress has pretty much done nothing about any of this. Now you say 3 things today. You say, well, the company was a subsidiary. You say the company acted perfectly appropriately under the law, and then you said, besides, the French do it too. The French company seems even worse. Do you or do other top executives at Halliburton really understand why the American public is so angry about this?
I would say that the company has been under the spotlight for a long time. We see what's printed in the press about us, and we listen to what our own employees have to say. And I think that from a purely sympathetic standpoint, we can look at and say, based upon the information that the American public gets, that they have a right to their opinions and to voice their opinions about our company in any way they see fit.
Based on the information the American public gets, but the information is factual. Huge government contracts, overcharging in those contracts, non-delivery and underperformance in those contracts when it has affected American troops in the field, the Vice President getting huge pension from your company, dealing with terrorist states. All of those things are not just, you almost say it dismissively, that's just what the American public hears. Well, those are facts that the American public hears. And in your response to Chairman Dorgan about why you've sort of moved out of Iran finally, albeit reluctantly, none of those answers had anything to do with patriotism or anything to do with the values that I think our country holds dear. They were all sort of business decisions. And I understand you're a business, but I understand that most businesses in our country operate at least under some modicum of values and patriotism. And I just have been disappointed in all of those answers, but more so, I appreciate your courage being here. I don't appreciate the company's behavior, the company for which you work. I guess I'll shift to Mr. Commerce for a moment. You said that North Korea and Cuba are concluded in the Trading with the Enemies Act. Should we, as we figure all this out, working on Senator Lautenberg's bill, the bill that Senator Dorgan and I have introduced, how do we improve the current sanction regimes? Current sanctions regime? Do we put it under the Trading with the Enemies Act? Is that something we should expand? Should we do it through other kinds of legislation? Give us, and you too, Mr. Thompson, give us your recommendation specifically on what we should do.
I think there are many courses of action that can be taken, including to clarify under IEPA the coverage and the definition of U.S. persons and how that might relate to another line that's also in that act, as well as in the executive order, about avoiding or evading the sanctions, which is also illegal for a U.S. person to do by using a foreign entity. So there are ways to look closely even at the existing authorities and to reinterpret them, to clarify them in various measures and acts in the legislature. But I do think it is a loophole that does need to be dealt with. In part, the loophole does have a rationale. That rationale, some of us recall from the time of the gas pipeline, when some foreign countries were very upset with what they viewed as the extraterritorial extension of U.S. authorities. And so we do walk something of a line here, but I think in the current context of Iran, it is very essential that we get to that line, and that line, I think, clearly does include foreign subsidiaries of U.S. company, where the profits are going to the U.S. company, and where it is ultimately the corporate decision of the parent, rather than the subsidiary, with respect to what its conduct is. And I think we see that in the parent being able to call it off and saying, no longer will these subsidiaries do this kind of business.